Dave, before we dive in and get started, kind of set the stage on who you are, what you do, and your background that I think makes you, super interesting to talk about this topic with because of what you've done in your playing days.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me, Austin, Sam. Good to see you guys. So yeah, this one hits home for me. So I grew up in Montana, played football at the University of Montana, and then got a chance to dabble in the NFL a little bit. I held a little more clipboards than played, but bounced around, did 4 teams in 3 years as an offensive lineman, many years and many pounds ago. But it was one of those things that led me kind of into my career as a physical therapist now. So current position is the director of rehab services, which includes physical therapy and occupational therapy at the Bone and Joint Institute of Tennessee.
The playing past, I think, makes you a perfect person to talk to today. So, Sam, let's kind of dive into what Mike Vrabel had to say last week at the end of the Titan season.
We have to address it. We have to at least look at it, and we are, and we have, and we do it every single day. We look at soft tissue injuries. We look at those soft tissue injuries of, repeat offenders. It doesn't take too hard to look and see that, Christian Fulton and David Long are, they're repeat offenders of soft tissue injuries. They have to figure out a way to train and act like, the game is played at a high speed. Kevin Byard hadn't pulled a hamstring since we've been here. And there's a durability factor to playing professional football that we should not overlook. Like that's real. There's guys that are durable and there's guys that aren't. Do you want to be a blister or you want to be a callus? And do you want to keep working through every day and you get your volume up so that you can withstand the volume and the rigors of the season? And that would be callus. Or do you want to be a blister and you want to, feel some discomfort, pull back, wait till you feel good, and then come back and do it for a couple days, and then you're going to, keep feeling that way. So those are the two thoughts. And there is a level of luck, and I think there's a level, it's cyclical. We've had 2, awful years as it relates to injuries. Prior to that, I think it was at a level where you could, say that it was in the range of normal. So,
Dave, what's your main takeaway from salty Mike Vrabel, who was no longer in the playoff hunt at that point? But, listening to that 90 seconds of Vrabel there, talking about a lot of different things, what kind of stood out to you the most?
It first off brings back a lot of memories. I've listened to head football coaches and seeing that look on their faces at times. And I think it's really interesting how much comes out in a short talk like that with the doctor of what kind of questions it presents. So I think the first thing is injuries are tough and frustrating because there's so many factors that can lead into injuries. And you can tell that frustration is obviously there for them. I think there's stats that up to 2,000 injuries occur in any one football season in the NFL. And you have that many guys playing such a rough and physical game. But I think that's the hard part about it. So when we first start looking at assessing injuries, the first thing you have to look at is kind of when are they occurring. So I think you said, 90% of them for them have been happening in games. So you look at kind of when they're occurring. Are they occurring early in the season, mid-season, late season? And so as you try to analyze where your issues are coming from, these are kind of the basic questions you have to look at. Some other ones would be the types of injuries. Are they soft tissue or are they, fractures, those types of things? Are they occurring with contact or non-contact type injuries? And so all these different factors come into play. And then from there, obviously, you kind of break down and say, okay, how do we address each one of those, especially if you start seeing one column start to pile up with a certain type of injury, especially the soft tissue injuries they've dealt with.
You mentioned the soft tissue. I think that's one of the more interesting takeaways I had from it is listening to Mike Vrabel single out a couple players on his team too, namely Christian Fulton and David Long, and these guys that he says are repeat offenders of those soft tissue injuries. And he said, we have to figure out a way to train. So, Dave, I guess my question for you as an NFL player and now with what you're doing, is it possible to train to prevent against soft tissue injuries? He says Kevin Byard's been doing a good job, hasn't had any of those types of issues since he's been a Titan. And what do those habits or off-season training programs look like?
No, it's a great question. And I think that, again, there's a lot of luck that comes in any amount of injuries, but when you look at it, it does seem like in my experience, and when I look at the people that we see in the clinic, certain patterns again start to evolve. So there's so many things that you can do in the off season and even during the season that can help, but things like making sure they're getting enough sleep, making sure that you're staying well hydrated. Hydration helps lubricate the joints. It helps your systems, recover, as well as the heat injury and heat illness type things that it presents against. Balanced nutrition. Are guys eating a nutrient dense type diet that allows them to recover well, and those type of things. There's specific training, and there's different types of training for different times of the year. So you have to break down, are certain people doing things that probably aren't as advantageous as others. And so it's tough. Again, this is where it gets so muddled sometimes, because everyone kind of assumes that they're all doing what everybody else is doing. But a lot of times you look at it, and it really breaks down to certain guys are better at taking care of their bodies than others. And especially in that type of a sport where, you don't have as much time usually to recover. 18-week season, right? So, if my kid pulls a hammy and it's an off season, it's way different than, if he's in season. It's the same for these guys. You got a short window. And so you have to look at healing timelines from maybe some very normal soft tissue injuries, but also making sure that you're allowing people to heal in a reasonable amount of time. So those are some of the things that just kind of come to mind.
Yeah.
At first.
Yeah. Dave, with the soft tissue discussion, when you're looking at, you mentioned nutrition, sleep, other habits like that, Kevin Byard's been in the league for 7 or 8 years. Christian Fulton just wrapped up his 3rd year. He's had multiple injuries dating back to his rookie season, had 2 soft tissue injuries this season. Does it make sense that you would see some things like that with poor nutrition or not as good nutrition or lack of sleep with younger players rather than the older players who have kind of had that light bulb go off and figure it out a little bit?
Yeah, and I saw that in my career. I mean, I can't comment on these guys specifically, but when I look at my career, I think there's a level of maturity that comes with the longer you play. Now, whether that's you start figuring out because you realize how bad you start to hurt as you play the game longer and longer, and you start taking things a little bit more seriously. But definitely there was some habits. I mean, when I came out as a rookie, I was with Seattle, and Warren Moon was the quarterback there. And I remember calling my dad and saying, man, this guy's 40, 41. And Dad, you didn't look like this at 40, but he had figured it out. He had his training regimen, and he went and got massage, and he ate well, and he stayed hydrated. And he wasn't the young kid, staying up all night playing Xbox either. He was getting his sleep and doing things right. And I remember seeing that pattern in my short time in the league with a lot of guys that were veterans. They learned how to take care of their bodies. They respected their bodies. When you're a kid, it's just like anything. You can bounce back from certain things. But when you're at that level of ball and that level of play for that period of time, going against the best guys in the world, obviously, guys kind of figure it out real quick that they need to start doing things that maybe they got away with in college, or could get away with when they were younger and hadn't played as much.
Is there a little bit of a genetic type of issue to this? I think saying that's probably where you're going next. I don't know. Again, we're trying to not put names on things. That we're trying to talk in a general sense. But Vrabel did signal out 3 guys, Byard for doing things and not getting hurt, and then 2 others for getting hurt. But is there a genetic aspect to some of these soft tissue problems?
There's definitely some things that you can look at, and there's some interesting studies here. But I know one thing. So my wife's an old rhythmic gymnast, and she has hypermobility in all of her joints. It allowed her to dance and do all these crazy things that she did with balls, hoops, and ribbons. Now, because she had hypermobility, she had to stay exceptionally strong, right? So she was more flexible than most people, but she had to stay exceptionally strong because hypermobility in itself isn't necessarily a bad thing, these loose ligaments, but if you're not strong, it can lead to instabilities and injuries, right? So it can be that way with a lot of different things. You could have people that are extremely powerful athletes, but they're not powerful through a good range of motion. So there may be mobility issues and things like that. And so when you look at the genetic side of things, those are some of the things you look at. There's some really interesting studies, and you can kind of see them. These are studies done by people a lot smarter than me, but they're looking at genotypes, and specifically the studies I've seen were in soccer athletes. And so they're actually finding genetic markers that may be linked to like protein synthesis and ability to heal and all these things. And so I think they're delving more and more into that, and trying to figure out, gosh, are there certain people that are have higher markers or high predictability for injury, which you could say that's a good thing, but you could also say, who knows in the future if you're going to, be labeled as a high risk before you've even seen the field. So it's been interesting to see where these studies will go, but definitely interesting that they're starting to see some patterns as we learn more and more about these genotypes.
Dave, another thing that Coach Vrabel brought up in that clip, I guess it's the marquee quote of that whole minute and a half, is when he says, do you want to be a blister or do you want to be a callus? And he talks about, just the volume of practice and reps and how it might help you withstand the rigors of the season. So from your perspective, what is there to that, and how does those high repetitions or high volume of practice work or reps help a player stay healthier for a longer period of time?
Sure. There's a lot to that, right? So there's a physical component and there's a mental component, right? And all of us are somewhere on that spectrum. Some are a little higher on one or lower on another. But when it comes to that, there's absolutely something to that, to training your body. So it's just like if I have somebody come into physical therapy, and I don't care if it's a 7-year-old person just working on some shoulder strength, or it's a high level athlete. If they go home and they get sore, they have a small injury, there needs to be an analysis of that injury. But a lot of those injuries, it's an expected type thing, or it's a expected type soreness. And if you take time off from that and you go back to an activity like he was mentioning, you're probably going to feel the same thing again. And so you have to have that component of, and this is why I laugh when I hear that quote, because I've heard that one specifically before, but also I can still hear old coaches saying, "Are you hurt or you're injured?" Right?
Yeah.
And as a young player, you're like, "Well, what does he mean? I mean, this feels bad," and you're trying to figure out because you don't know. And so you trust people like your training staff and your physical therapists and things to tell you. But I do laugh at that because there's a lot of truth to that. So there's so many things that are playable type things, and that you can slowly ramp up volume with, and improve strength and tendon strength and ligament strength and power and things. But you also have to recognize when those things aren't there and it's gone another step further. And so that's the tough part is, as an athlete, nobody wants to, usually be off the field. Nobody wants to hurt their ability to help the team or to continue their career in the NFL. So there is that line there. Some guys play with things they probably shouldn't play with, but there's other times when guys will do the opposite and they probably could play with things. So I think as you go into a season and your off-season training, you look at the ability to gradually ramp up activities. You do a lot of cross training and those type of things because, you could, as an offensive lineman, guys were so focused on power, but now you look at it and I've never seen so many fat guys doing yoga in my life now, but they're starting to figure out like how important mobility is and flexibility is. And so all these different types of things in the NFL that you'll see that they've improved upon, but gradually ramping up. And then sometimes when you get towards mid-season or late season, some things have to back down because you're getting more and more beat up. You're getting more and more fatigued mentally and physically. And so there's that there's a balance here. And that's what makes injuries very frustrating for us and for coaches, is trying to find that balance of where somebody is on this spectrum of whether it's time to rest or time to continue.
Yeah, and Mike Vrabel had another video that we're going to play too about analytics and how kind of what you were about to get into and we're getting into there, Dave, is how analytics can help you on a recovery, process. And so let's go ahead and hear from Mike Vrabel again from that same season-ending press conference about injury analytics.
Okay, so injuries, what would you want to do there? We're using the analytics to track the GPS.
Right. That's what I want to. That's what I'm asking. What are your thoughts? Like, where are you guys with the involvement with injuries, but then also game planning?
Yeah, I mean, we have, we track the speed every practice. They have it on their iPad, and they go around and they say, "Hey, I'd like to get you to 90%." That's how we track that throughout the week as it relates to injuries. We get a report the next day from the game about. It's got speed, max speed. It's got distance traveled at those max speeds. Anything over 15 miles an hour. So you've got that list. The one thing that I would be curious in is acceleration. As it tracks from injury. We can get you up to 90%, but does it track? 0 to, 15 over 15 yards. How quick is a guy, accelerating? How can we use that to help him, recover from injury, what the baseline is? They mark accelerations, like, hey, he accelerated this many times in a game, but does it have that number of what that speed is, or what that acceleration is, that speed, over a level of time?
So, there's Mike Vrabel again, and you saw the beginning of that with Vrabel and Tron Davenport of ESPN had that back and forth. Everybody's trying to figure out what the heck's going on with this team. But Dave, what stood out on that part of the conversation with Vrabel and analytics?
Yeah, so that's interesting. That's not something I've ever really had a chance to play with, to be honest.
Really? Yeah.
But looking at those things, we do similar type things in rehab. There's some systems that we'll use in rehab that will track specific movements of someone's limbs. So if knees are diving in or out and the speed of how fast that's moving gives us an idea gosh, functionally, are they going to be able to perform at a high level before I start seeing bad mechanics at joints and those type of things. So in similar, I think they're using that information, which is pretty amazing, to start to see if they're seeing patterns, to track. Maybe there's a certain amount of time that somebody's in. If they start seeing certain things, they're going to pull somebody out, or even just to specifically change their training patterns in the off season or during the season. If they're seeing certain types of patterns at mid-season, late season, those type of things. So I think it's pretty amazing. I would love to see some of that stuff, kind of what they pull out of a game and how they're analyzing it, because I think that's pretty amazing. We're definitely at a time where we have more things at our disposal, and the hardest thing is making sure that we're using it in a way that's going to benefit the athlete and our teams, of course.
Whether it's a player returning from injury or basically tracking an injury and a player's status for a game, Vrabel likes to mention 90% a lot of the time. That's kind of the number. We got to get him back to 90%. That's always what he's shooting for. What is the significance of 90% and kind of aiming there instead of 95, 85, 100? Like, why is that the benchmark for, tracking injury?
Yeah, I think different people look at it different ways. So I'm not going to, again, I don't know why they're using 90% as their specific marker. I know in rehab, we'll use it as a marker for, getting somebody to at least that level, to make sure that, again, mechanics look good, that they look like they have the physical conditioning level to get to a certain status. We'll use markers in with ACL rehab. If your left, knee is 90% of your other leg, then the studies will actually show that your chance of re-injury can go down and those type of things. So it kind of depends on, I think, what they're looking at. I'm sure there's not, I don't know if they're using 90 as just a global thing, but I'm sure they're tracking it real specifically, that he probably didn't say of what types of things they want at 90%. But I know a lot of times getting to a certain level and knowing that they're performing consistently at that makes you feel that, gosh, with the adrenaline and getting back out to the field in the game, that they're going to be able to perform at a high level and still be able to tolerate the stresses on the joints and the body at that time.